Artificial intelligence is reshaping everything, from the silicon powering our systems, to the defenses protecting our digital world, and now to how we explore entirely new frontiers. This is the next phase of AI at scale.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Shimel, and welcome to Monday Techstrong Gang Live, coming at you noon on East Coast time, 9 o'clock for our friends out in California, a little later in the afternoon maybe for our friends across the pond in Europe. I hope this new time works for you, but quite frankly, like everything else we do here at Techstrong, it's a bit of an experiment. If we get feedback that this isn't the right thing to do, we won't do it. Right? We'll go back to the morning show. I kind of like the morning show anyway. But let's see how it goes. We've got our lunchtime gang here assembled, right, to talk to us today. Actually, this is a pretty cool gang. This might be the first time we have half US and half Canadians. But, if you saw the Big Bunny show last night, we're all Americans, right? Mm-hmm. Whether we live in North America or South America, or Central America, we're Americans, and Viva America. So let me introduce you to our gang. Chris Blask, Garima Bajpai. The Garima, this is your first time on this year, right?
Yes.
Welcome back. I know you've been busy and traveling and doing things. And of course, we have the Dean up in New York, Mike Vizard.
Hello.
Gang, welcome. Welcome and happy Monday. Mike, I don't think you need to be a rocket science to figure out that if every single wafer of silicon that gets produced has a home, the semiconductor market is probably going to be pretty healthy. But, that's what we're leading off with today, a Captain Obvious segment.
Well, but there are issues, as always. There are always issues. So the Security Industry Association thinks that they're going to pass $1 trillion in sales for new processors. Mainly, a lot of it is AI related, and a lot of it is also the memory that goes into those systems. And that's all good for the chip industry, at least, because at least in this gold rush, they're the folks making the blue jeans and the picks and the shovels and selling that and making a lot of money. However, demand is far exceeding supply, and they are talking about new classes of processors, and it's more of a marketing term than an actual name these days, but 2 nanometers are here and people are working on 1 nanometer processors. And these things are really not so much smaller as much as they are just 3D designs where the things are stacked on top of each other, but they're more complex to build and more costly to build, you can assume, as a result of that. So the question becomes, will we ever get to the point where we have enough processors, or is demand always going to exceed supply and the cost of AI is always going to be, well, relatively high? Alan, what do you think?
Well, no, and no. Short answers. But here's the thing. Obviously, look, we're in a market right now for semis, 175% of supply we have a market for. So prices are high. We're also at the beginning of the evolution of this market in terms of what are the semis we're going to need going forward. Are we going to need the big NVIDIA GPUs as our computing workloads, especially around AI and in these AI factories, move more towards inference from training, right? But it's not, even like memory chips, right? Even good old-fashioned DRAM memory chips, you can't buy them. The entire world's production of them is basically sold already, pre-sold, right? So, these are things that need to be figured out. The other thing is, let's face it, for the highest level chips, whether we're talking the NVIDIA GPUs or the Qualcomm, there aren't that many fabs that make these chips at that level. In fact, there's one company basically, right? TSMC, and then the folks in the Netherlands who do the etching, have the etching technology. When you have that sort of stranglehold, when you have that sort of, supplier formula, what do you think they're going to do? Just say, oh, we're going to make it more and cheaper and bring down our revenue? No, probably not. Especially when one company uses that as a crutch to make sure that someone will help them if their neighbors across the sea invade them. And I'm not talking about Greenland, right? So this is, are we going to hit a $1 trillion milestone this year? Again, pretty obvious to me. I don't know if I'd call it news.
So I was talking to a couple ISVs about this particular issue, and they feel like they're already in a bind. And part of their issue is, well, the end users have kind of been convinced that AI is free or cheap, and they're kind of looking at all these costs that they're absorbing to run the AI, and they're basically saying, hey, this doesn't look good for our business model because I can't increase the price of my subscriptions by 100%. And yet I don't know how to not do AI. So all these companies are like feeling some significant margin pressure as a result of all this. So Garima, you're nodding your head, but I don't know if you're hearing the same things.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Mike, because what I see from where I stand is that this is like a portfolio pivot, which we need to do because the market is flattish. There is no return of investment on all these kind of AI centric, applications and the hype created around it, right? So what is happening in turn is that we have to ensure that we have 30 to 40% of capex flow into the infrastructure space, right, with these chips and all that. So what it in turns is calling for is that we have to look at where we have to downsize, and there are repercussions, right? The repercussions is that from the portfolio pivot perspective, there's downsizing, there is layoffs, there is cost cutting, there are like margin pressures. So I think there is a lot other things which are happening due to this kind of capex centricity for chips, and of course the supply chain and rewiring and everything else needs to be done. But right now what I'm seeing is that there is like a substantial amount of pressure to have a lot of capex centricity and see where the cash flows from that perspective.
Yeah.
Chris, you were playing around with AI a lot. Are you seeing these cost issues or what?
Well, again, a lot of the work we do is focused on sovereign AI on local systems and so forth, and in small cannons and small data sets and so forth, you don't need a lot of GPUs. That work just hunky dory all the time. But on this topic, I can think of it. It's in a lot of ways, like Alan, you're saying. I agree with you. Chips are kind of the new oil. It's becoming commoditized, and yeah, we have fragile supply chains, and that has to be solved. But I think about Gwynne Shotwell at SpaceX, right? If anybody's noticed this last week, SpaceX got approval to launch 1 million AI satellites in 24-hour solar orbits, and this is so Gwynne had a company called Orbit's Edge in 2020. During the early before Starlink sort of launched, when SpaceX is going really well, she was really excited about that. Right. And that was sort of what fascinated me at the time. So now it started, and any space geeks like me, the Starship platform is coming along this year, next year. Look out over the next decade. They will launch 1 million AI satellites packed with chips. What does that mean? Well, to this topic, yeah, supply chain of chips is going where it's going. And we've talked about this a lot on this show week to week over the last year, how they get used where, what kinds of chips and so forth. Again, there's better experts than me on that. But the amount of processing we will do in the next 10 years, the next 20 years, whether it is, a million satellite constellation in space and or massive data centers and or, inference and everything else being done on all sorts of small little devices in the ground, there's a lot of chips there.
Yeah, but I agree what Chris you're saying, but I also recognize, and I want to pick Ellen's brain on this, that, I see that we are in a cycle of AI monetization lag, which means that we are debt funded for all the chips and all the hype which is created and the investment on the AI data centers. What do you think, Alan, from your side or your perspective, how things change this year and next year?
So I do think we're in the middle of the training to inference change, which is going to be big because it takes NVIDIA out of the only game in town seat, right? You'll have the Amazon chips and Google chips, which I think are made by Broadcom. You have Broadcom itself making a lot of chips. Microsoft's making chips. ARM, I think, is doing something with it. So you're going to see more suppliers, and more suppliers is a good thing, right? So unfortunately, we're already in this year. So if you're saying this year to next year, maybe 26 to 27, well, maybe by 27, that it's not as tight a market. I don't think the market goes down at Chris's chip. We're going to need more chips to Chris's point, we're going to need more chips than ever. But I think we'll have more suppliers. And so it won't be as tight as it is now, where you just got to, this is like, trying to buy the hottest toy in Christmas for your kids and you didn't go out early enough. But Mike, to your point, this is, what do you expect from an industry that says, here, take the first one, it's free, until they get you hooked, right? This is kind of out of big tobacco. Mm-hmm. And now, well, now you want to keep using it? Oh, you got to pay for this. I can't make it up on volume.
I think, Garima, I want to ask you this. I think all this puts a significant amount of pressure on the developers, because I think that the metric that they're going to be judged against is how many tokens are they processing to deliver this functionality? And that means they got to write better and smarter software. So I think this all comes back to hit the developers hard, and it's going to be, you need a lot of talent to write this correctly.
Exactly. And this is cyclic pressure, right? I mean, you have the chips, you have the infrastructure, but you don't have the developers, because we are in that kind of a tight curve of revenue and return of investment. So now we have to force to use our developers to go in the direction of seeking support from AI assisted tools, capabilities. And in turn, what it means is that, you also have to look at, how you lower the cost pressure from, not hiring or not like stabilizing your hiring a little bit, because developers were scarce from the beginning. So it's a cyclic pressure which is being built up. At the end of the day, I think it all boils down to how all this monetizes in the longer run, because this cannot continue if we do not have enough, significant, substantial evidences that these are the revenue drivers. So I am yet to see where the balance is, right? And as you rightly pointed out, we will also see developer scarcity in the longer run, because people are also using or moving towards AI assistant tools.
This is true. So when you think about it, and you start with the chips, heck, you can even work your way all the way down to the metals used to build the chips, and then the chips and the systems and the data centers and the developers. The entire AI supply chain is constrained, and it appears it will be such the case for at least a year and a half.
That's true. Yes.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think it'll be more than that, even because you don't know what's next. And it's one thing if you're just talking about these cutting edge AI chips, which we're focusing on. But guys, we even have capacity problems with just DRAM regular memory chips that, they're kind of run of the mill. It makes me wonder why, if Intel can't thrive on that foundry business model in this environment, who can? I mean, you're selling hamburgers to starving people in the desert here if you're a foundry. Think about it, right? I just put up a sign that says, I can make your chips. You want more chips? Come see me, Mr. Chips.
Yeah, and to your point, Alan, I think not all segments or all sectors or all industries will benefit equally from this, right? So the winners will write the history. So who are the people who will extract revenue out of it would be the people who will drive innovation and who will drive the market strategy. And again, don't also forget about geopolitics here, right? So things, there are certain aspects and different kind of dimensions we have to look at it from.
Got it. I don't disagree. But look, it is, but let's step back. The semi market's $1 trillion market. That's huge. It's a red letter, right?
Yeah,
That
this is
goes
high
out
margin
there.
business.
Yes, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. But we got to hop into our next section here. Cybersecurity in the age of AI. We've seen craziness over the last 2-3 weeks. Chris, I don't know about you, but it keeps my blood pumping reading about all this crazy stuff. Mike, what do we got?
I don't know if it keeps my blood pumping as much as maybe it just terrorizes me. So, the folks with the Opus language model have come up with, I guess they ran it against all the open source software looking
Not
for
all, just some.
just some. Anyway, they found 600 vulnerabilities in a matter of a couple of days. And, this is something that human researchers would have taken years to go do. And now at the same time, we've also got reports now where somebody stole somebody's credentials for AWS and then used AI to reverse engineer their way into that system from there and basically hacked in 8 minutes. It seems like, Chris, to me, that the bad guys are going to be able to discover and exploit vulnerabilities in minutes, hours now. And are we able to respond to that, or is there just going to be havoc?
Is it yes to both? And again, one of the reasons I love this show, because we've been doing this week to week, and we talked about this, a month ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago. And for me, this maps all the way back 30-something years, because we will get to points when, and we are demonstrably at this point when, for a lot of reasons. And it's not just the speed of AI, the work in supply chain security over the last, 6, 7, 10, 12 years, getting to the point where we now have this level of complexity. And look at what we just talked about in the last segment. So fly 1 million satellites packed with GPUs and tell me where the software's, bill of materials is. It's a matter of scale. And I think that, I don't know. And in my entire career, we keep working through this, because if we didn't have something with the capabilities of large language models and everything, we call AI these days, we would have other problems with security. The bad guys wouldn't have them, but the good guys wouldn't have them either. And you have to have them just to have coherence at the size and scale of cybersecurity writ large today at all. So, the usual, in security and conflict, the underdog always has the first move, right? The people who are not constrained by rules have the first move. Yes. And if, Alan, you'd mentioned the phishing, you got passed by a phishing thing 4, 5, 6 months ago. Phishing protections are dead. I get such awesome phishing emails, right?
They are.
I'm watching you on the Techstrong gang. I really like your work. No, you don't. You're a bot, but you just done the research that fast. So, Mike, to your question, yes. My advice to particularly small operators, small industrial and so forth in the last 6 months is go get a ChatGPT account or something for $20 a month. Tell it who you are. Look out on the internet and find what Chris Blask and Fred Cohen and Gene Spafford and all these old fools have said about cybersecurity and help me compare what do I have. Because I'll tell you, for all the products and services, that getting experts to come in and do any assessment, even poorly, of organizations to give them advice as opposed to selling them products, that's been the big gap. AI, with all its faults right now, does a damn fine job of that. So if you're long answer, but if you're a small organization, use some AI, ask it some intelligent questions, pretend it's a consultant. It'll probably give you really good pointers. If you're a bigger company, use it properly. You should be able to tighten up your networks to make them quite hard to mess with. And it shouldn't take more time than you have before they take you down, because they will otherwise.
So here's the thing though, guys. The fact that Claude Opus 4.6 found 600 vulnerabilities in some very well-known open source projects in and of itself is a scary proposition. But Chris, did you know, we all suspected that these things have lots of vulnerabilities. If you poke them enough? We just didn't have enough pokers.
Right, and now we do. So if you're the developer, use it yourself before your adversaries do.
Absolutely. Now, but here, because that's the other point of this. You could say, well, don't look. Yeah, I forgot actually, I know what president it was. A president said, well, don't try so hard to find things, or, something along those lines. And, don't test people for, that's what it was. Don't test people for COVID so our COVID numbers aren't so bad. Don't run these things so we don't find these vulnerabilities. Why do you think the bad guys aren't running them? Do you think they're not? We're the only ones in town who get to run them? Ludicrous. So this is, Gotti Everin, who I talked about in this article that I wrote, and Heather from Google, they said 6 months ago that we are about to come to this cataclysmic thing where the amount of vulnerabilities we're going to find is going to overwhelm our ability to patch them. 6 months to the day, Opus comes out and we get this. But here's the good news. I wrote another article that just came out this morning. It's called, what the heck is it called? Son of, not Clawbot. What's the other?
Moltbot.
Moltbot. Son of Moltbot versus Opus. Kind of like, remember the old Japanese Mothra versus Godzilla and all that kind of stuff, Son of Godzilla. So I was riding my bicycle this weekend. I do some of my best thinking when I'm riding my bike. And I'm riding down A1A thinking about the world, me, AI, because this is what my life is. And I came up with the greatest idea. You got this Moltbot, which has its own security issues, right? Terrible. I mean, this thing had no security built in. But what is it? It's good at going viral. It's good at getting a lot of these things working. The only way to beat or to keep up with AI found vulnerabilities is to use AI to fix them. So why can't we have Moltbot, an army of Moltbots, autonomously take the Claude Opus output and go fix on these open source projects, put patches in or make them available, or write them and have them out there so that people use them. Better than that, why don't we build Opus and Moltbot into our platform engineering platforms so that, boom, now as part of my platform, I used to do a SAST scan and a DAST scan and a vulnerability scan and a pen test. Well, now let's do an Opus test too. Find as many of these vulnerabilities as I can as part of my platform. As new software gets added to the platform, it gets an Opus scan. And then have think of them as T cells in your immune system. Have an army of Moltbots at the standby, ready to rapid deploy to go fix these vulnerabilities that your Opus is finding, your Opus scan found. Look, I'm ready to go start a new security company and do this. Right? Yeah. This is where we are. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, so Fred Cohen, who gave us the PhD thesis with computer viruses in it, famously, not nearly famously enough, said that they could be used for good. To your point, Alan, and in short, yes, people could and should probably do that, particularly in the open source library world, and that's a good thing. But more importantly, and it's not about Moltbot and Claude Opus particularly, it's doing things a certain way. Where you take these, and because these products will change and so forth. I love Moltbook. I think it's a train wreck, but it's a fascinating train wreck, and it is a lot of the dynamics are accurate, and a lot of the flaws are instructive. But if you ground these things, like I said, for the open source world, have at it. Everybody, I think it'll work out fine. As an organization, take these tools, put them inside your own organization, point them at your code, at your infrastructure, whatever it is, and it won't be about security. You'll save money, right? Yes, you'll find a bunch of flaws and so forth. You'll fix those, and you'll find out you're losing a lot of money because of the disconnects across the right. And that's in the late '90s. Firewalls stopped being about security, and that's when it took off. I think we're here on this as well. It's not about cybersecurity. You'll get better security, but if you do this correctly with your own code base as a consumer or as a software producing organization, you'll just get way more efficient.
Which means saving money.
Yes.
So to end that one. Good, Mike.
So Garima, will developers spend more time building patches, or do you think that it'll be the same amount of time, they'll just build them faster?
I would like to kind of step back a little bit and focus on what this vulnerability detection Claude Opus 4.6 has done. And two things which are evidently different this time, and they are the strength areas of this whole approach, is the reasoning part. If you see how Opus 4.6 has approached it, is as a programmer's intent, right? To see from where these vulnerabilities have originated from, checking the Git histories, for example, code patterns, generating precise input sequences for complex bugs. And that's where the first win starts. Like, the reasoning approach is quite different and powerful. The second thing which I would say is performance, that this outperforms human teams, as Alan mentioned. So definitely this has been a winner, because of course if you detect these new vulnerabilities at scale at this speed, I think this is great. But the trick is in the balancing act, right? I mean, we cannot just say that it's the best security researcher which we have found, right? And of course, as Ellen also mentioned, that it is susceptible to how misuse of these detection and techniques would be done in the longer run. So how do we ensure that we do not fall trap of these opportunities, and of course see this opportunity in the space where we can also redesign our workflows, right? And to ensure that we have linear to agentic kind of roadmaps. And how do we induce or introduce these kind of new capabilities into the developer ecosystem? So to answer your question, Mike, I think there's a lot of upskilling needed to be done. Nothing overrides human judgment, for sure, at least not now, right? And then we also have to ensure that we understand the key strength areas of this powerful technique, and also expose our teams to use them in a proper way.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Guys, I'm going to jump to the next section if it's okay, though. But yeah, I like the Moltbots versus the Opus kind of thing, little Japanese movie kind of stomping on buildings and at the last second getting together to do what's right for the planet. But let's speaking on sci-fi, let's go to space.
You like horror movies too, I take it then, right?
I never liked the horror movies, but I did like the Japanese Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan, Ghidra. We have a new three-headed monster today: Gemini, Claude, and I don't know, Perplexity. But anyway, let's talk about space, the final frontier.
Yeah, well, let's talk about something fun here. It's the folks at NASA have figured out that they can use AI to help better navigate the Mars rover, because they can figure out where the bad terrain is and maybe avoid it and maybe not wind up in a pothole or something. But Garima, what's your take on this? Because, I'm excited about this for one reason. It's like a use case that I have not seen, and it's not just somebody kind of, doing some little task a little bit faster. It's like something entirely new and different, at least it is to me.
Exactly. So, I mean, if you trace back, this rover was launched in 2020, right? And in 2021, approximately touched down. The core objective of this rover was, I think, was this microbiological, signatures which they were kind of trying to find, and of course, returning with soil tubes, etc., etc. So now, what was the problem with this rover was that there was a 20-minute one-way lag between Earth and Mars radio communication delays, right? And what has happened, and this is again very interesting and powerful, is the AI implementation has ensured that they have a digital twin, and through that digital twin, they have been able to lay out the trajectory. Also, I think this is again breakthrough from a communication and planning perspective, because there was a lot of limits associated with how real-time corrections on the trajectory could be done for the rover, for example. And we could get rid of a lot of mobility constraints with this implementation. And how this whole implementation has been like processed is that of course Cloud A is kind of having the data sets which human use, but also it has enhanced and projected some of the features and generated some kind of continuous safe paths for the rover, right? And it remarkably improves the communication as well as the efficiency of the rover. Now, why I see this as an opportunity is commercial AI in the space, aerospace area, right? If we can fine tune, let's say, through the domain data, I think it will be great. We can also do some kind of integration in edge cases for robustness for space contract, for example. You will start to see a lot of these kind of RFPs, which will talk about this ML navigation tools, which can also boost, some kind of market opportunity for firms, which can include AI developers. So I think it's kind of exciting, but again, it's also challenging because it has bias and risk associated with it, and it's not a proven technology yet. It's just the first breakthrough. So we'll have to watch out for how this whole thing, develops.
Agreed. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I did a Shimmy Says on what are all these AI jobs going to be anyway, all these new jobs that AI is going to create. And I mentioned that, one of the most exciting areas was space, right? When we could start putting, you want to call them satellites, you want to call them floating or orbiting data centers, permanent stations, lunar, maybe on Mars, mining asteroids, right? These are things, these are in the industries of this last half of this century, perhaps, right?
Right.
And into the next. And AI is going to enable it, because you need AI to do these things, but there will be human jobs that go along with it.
I completely agree with you, Ellen, because I think from the beginning, at least I see two potential industries getting benefited out of this AI movement, space being one of them, the exploration into space. And, a lot of these things which were not humanly possible, if we could utilize AI technologies for that, that would be great, And the second industry which will be quite benefited, and I'm not like, no guesses here, it's health science and, drug industry, because that is the second industry segment I feel that will be highly benefited out of this AI movement. And having said that, I mean, it brings to us to a point where responsible sourcing becomes very, very important. Even if for space technologists, we need to ensure that we source, responsibly and ethically.
Well, yeah, as an Apollo era space geek kid, right? I gotta reflect on this topic, right? I had a Curiosity rover prototype wheel at my house for a number of years. It had JPL on the. There's a hack in there. The ones they actually shipped have JPL in Morse code because NASA wouldn't let them do it. So this topic, right? And as we're talking about rovers, you guys remember the Opportunity rover? That its last message was, batteries are low and it's getting dark, and the whole world, cried because, oh, this little rover before AI. But agreement to your point, right? This is where this is going. Autonomy, the dollars involved. Look, Elon Musk is totally right about this one, right? These next 20 years, we're going to colonize Mars, the moon, and so forth. What does that mean? We're going to have all sorts of autonomous stuff that's going to generate a lot of information locally. The economics just demand it. And as we move further into that period, it's not just sourcing ethically here, it's sourcing, manufacturing on, non-Terran bodies will become a thing. So what we're putting together now is the logistics that needs to operate in that environment. And we're humans. We always make this mistake. We say the last 10 years of my life and. Even folks like us who've lived through this rapid acceleration of change. But if anybody knows a way to do that in 10 years and 20 years, 30 years, whenever it is, from here, we're building that out on Mars without massive autonomy. And I think we get the good parts of sci-fi. The risk of the bad parts are certainly there. But I think a lot of the practical realities and current systems are driving down this path where the systems need to be reliable enough. Who's controlling them? Is it all centralized? Huge concerns about that. But the systems themselves, I think, they need to evolve. And the environment is what it is.
But here's the problem. Here's the problem. And this is something I think AI can help us with. I said it last week in one of the segments. When John Kennedy announced the Apollo mission, right? We choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy, because it's hard. We knew it was going to be hard. And we knew we were going to have to invent technologies. But we made a commitment, and leadership made that commitment, and you made the commitment and you did it. Now, we did that to win a race against our rivals. We didn't do it to make a lot of money or to commercialize things, though it did wind up throwing off a lot of commercial products. This one's a little different. We've got to make the commitment to industrialize space, to commercialize, if that's a word, commercialize space, because we know that the money is there for it. It is a viable a viable source of wealth. Mm. And whether that's done via government or via private industry or combinations or via a world, well, now's not a great time for the world to do anything together, it seems, but maybe this is something that brings the world together, right? And maybe with knowing that we have AI at our disposal to do this, we'll be more likely to make that kind of commitment. But because to do this, to do what we're talking about, it's a commitment. I think it's bigger than any one Elon Musk can do. You need more than SpaceX. I'm sorry, go, Chris.
In an audience like this, there's probably some Isaac Arthur fans as well. Go back and forth over the present to the predictable futures over the next decades, century or two. What does it look like? These capabilities will come along. The question is just when and how, but the ground-based telescopes, come to mind because with the politics of the world, a lot of friends of mine are big into that and complaining about Starlink and all these satellites out there. And I have to help them understand that China's launching thousands too. This is if you're a 60s kid, you've been following sci-fi and science. This is the era when there's a lot of stuff starts to orbit the Earth. It just is. Good, bad, otherwise, it is. This is where we're going. On this issue with AI, and forget about Mars so much, but the moon is right there. We're going to put a lot of gear on that body soon. It's all being built now. It's being launched now. How does that play out? And again, if there's other ways than what we're calling AI and these sort of systems and so forth to do that efficiently, that drive the economics of it, then I don't know what they are.
Yeah. So, I also see another side of this opportunity is that making it more participative and inclusive. Why I say so is that if you think about simulators or digital twins, right, tracing the trajectory paths, I think technology makes a lot of these things essential that it becomes for masses, right? So developers, for example, can participate in this. They can also contribute to this because explanation of or explainability of this whole, how this whole technology is evolving should be done, and this can also be done by developers, for example, right? So it's not like a kind of a premium opportunity for a certain segment of people or segment of society, right? So I feel that, technology also brings a lot of contribution and participation, which is exciting.
Well, I'm involved and always have been with a lot of international standards organizations and so on and so forth. And just 2 out of 3 meetings before this call today have been on that. And what I've said in both those is that I think we're looking at it that way from standards and protocols that historically have been developed by a handful of people, and those of us who spend our time on that come from various perspectives for whatever reasons, and that doesn't scale. And a lot of us knew it wouldn't scale, and just like having one Google and one this and one that, and not enough DNS servers, and not enough PKI, it's been good enough. However, ultimately, it doesn't scale. We have to get to the fully federated model that was the internet design in the first place. And this come up a number of times. I'll just say it, right? The risk right now is centralization, authoritarian control, which if you don't agree with it, whatever it is, whoever has it that has a problem. But I would go beyond that and say, from an engineering perspective, that is a crash waiting to happen. It is brittle and cannot be done. And if we go down that path, we're setting ourselves up for problems that will play out over the next couple of decades. I think, Garima, to your point, I think quite the opposite is already happening, is the low entropy, cheap, better, faster, cheaper path where you enable everybody. Put this in there. So what I've been trying in the standard space, I think that most protocols will be developed by 2 nodes, 2 machines, 2 companies. No one else will ever hear about them because they'll be developed all the time in real time based on the agreements and relationships you already have in place. And we'll only hear about it, SPDX and Cyclone DX and HTTPS, when it becomes important enough globally that a bunch of mammals in a working group can wrap it up. But most of this stuff goes to autonomy. And if that's not fundamentally better based on sovereignty at the bottom end, then my name's Mickey Mouse.
Well, that's all, folks. Anyway, hey, we're out of time, man. I got to pull it. Chris, Garima, thank you for joining us. Mike is always great. Hope you've enjoyed this. Drop us a line if you like it better here at noon versus at 10 a.m. Eastern, because we'd love to hear what you have to say. We had Techstrong TV on before this, and we'll be replaying our Techstrong TV broadcast after this. So hopefully it works better for you, but I'd really love for you here to know. We'll be back tomorrow at noon again on The Gang with some fresh new topics and some more of our great gang friends. Until then, though, this is Alan Shimel. We're out.